A point of order. I am sorry for any of you who do not know, these two people sitting beside me are Derek Jackson, currently with the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department. He has been the spokesperson there, public facing officer for a very long time. And Alicia Dyer, who was a deputy also at the Sheriff Department, and has become a social worker, is a social worker, as is Derek. So they both have experience in the Sheriff's Department and have a social work background, and there's much more about them, but that's what's relevant for today.
Excellent. Good point of order. Who are we talking to today? So thank you for being here. I'm actually not on the camera. I'm sorry. There we go. I never thought I would have to know where my spot was in church, but so the first area of concern that we have as Washtenaw Congregational Sanctuary, as well as all immigrant activist, is the issue and the vulnerability around traffic stops. We hear in lots of different settings how for many people of color, traffic stops can be significantly dangerous for them. And so we want all communities to feel safe in regards to traffic stops. Our undocumented immigrant community has another layer of vulnerability, and we'll talk about driver's license for all and all of that. But we will see that traffic stops are the first step into the violent cycle of deportation. And often has been used by law enforcement, both here in Washtenaw County as well as around the country. The insignificant stops, the taillights being out, the traffic mirror not being fully intact, too much tinting. Now, Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti have banned those traffic stops, those ones that are so minor that it really doesn't lend to public safety issues. But that doesn't mean all cities or townships in Washtenaw County actually have that ban. So I would like to ask both of you, how will you kind of reinforce this idea that traffic stops actually put people in danger, particularly people of color and immigrants specifically, how to minimize that so that our community members are safe, and how that will be reflected in your training of your deputies, those law enforcement officers who are in the cars, out on the streets, looking to keep the community safe. That's what we hope their efforts are. But how are they going to be trained not to just pull people over at random, and how are they going to be trained to keep immigrants safe once they are pulled over? Does that make sense? What's your policy, and how are you going to implement that into training? Because it really is, that is a very, very tricky and dangerous moment for our immigrant community, and we want to, it starts there. That violence starts at that traffic stop so often, and so we want to see how it's going to make its way from policies to those patrol cars on the streets right now. So I don't know.
If you will just stay there for now, and we'll start with Alicia now, and on our next question we'll start with Derek. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I, on my platform, I support ending unnecessary traffic stops. I also helped organize, along with a bunch of community members, to add value to the work that Councilmember Cynthia Harrison was doing in Ann Arbor, where they actually discontinued the use of some low-level stops. I really believe that traffic stops are extremely dangerous, and we have high rates of disparities. The Sheriff's Office has been arresting Black people 11.1 times more than white people for nonviolent low-level offenses. And I know from working there that oftentimes that can happen from heavy-handed traffic enforcement. The other thing I want to do, along with ending unnecessary traffic stops, is to stop the quotas that are going on. So when I was a deputy working at the sheriff's office, I was constantly being evaluated on how many stops and tickets and arrests I was making. And if you as an administrator evaluate your employees on these productivity numbers, it increases over-policing. And so I want to make sure that we're not placing deputies in this high-pressure quota system, and also in tandem with that, create a policy that also stops the low-level stops. And in addition, another problem that happens with traffic stops is deputies will randomly run people's plates. And I worked with Washtenaw Regional Organizing Coalition because many people in the community were alerting us to this reality where deputies were running people's plates and then seeing if they had no insurance or not and using that as a reason to stop them. A couple problems with that: it's predatory, but also the insurance companies only report to Secretary of State twice a month. So it could absolutely be the fact an officer would make a stop for this and they actually did have insurance. I was able to meet with the chiefs of police and we were able to get some agencies to tell the officers to stop that practice. And those are just some examples of ways that administrators can really curb harm in this arena. And then the other thing we have to do is the sheriff oversees the jail for the whole county. And so while I can end unnecessary traffic stops with the road patrol contract deputies, that doesn't mean that I can necessarily control what other agencies are doing, but I can control what happens in the jail. And from a jail standpoint, when it comes to protecting immigrant communities especially, we have to end cooperating with ICE on voluntary detainers. We have been doing it, and it's in the policy. I have talked with Immigration Law Resource Center as well as other folks in this arena. It has caused decades of harm. And I even have a sample policy as well that I can share that's been implemented in other areas that does actually protect immigrants and keep them safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. We do have another question on the protecting immigrants in custody, so we'll return to that.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for everyone being here. This is beautiful, right? This is what we should be doing in community, is really listening, learning, and talking about these issues. If you paid attention the last few weeks, you hear me often saying that, there's certain issues that we just can't play politics with, and this is one of them. We got to be honest and truthful. We got to listen, and we got to talk about the facts, because people are listening and lives are impacted. So this is beautiful, and this is really why I'm excited to be here. It's in my platform, but I don't often talk about it because before Jerry Clayton leaves office, it'll be done, and that is limiting to those minor level traffic stops. It's a really important piece. It's already in the works. It'll be done before Jerry leaves office, but that is an important component of it. But one other piece that we rarely talk about is the reason why officers are doing these minor level traffic stops is really pretextual. They stop you for this because they want to search your vehicle and get in your car. So if the root cause of a pretext stop is a consent search, and we need to, which is what we did, address the root cause. Let me address the motivation of why an officer would want to search your vehicle in the first place. So our new policy, which has been in existence for a while now, you can't even ask to search someone's vehicle when you pull them over unless there's an evidentiary reason for why you would have to do that. So if I pull you over for a cracked windshield, there's no reason I need to search your vehicle. I can't search your vehicle anymore at the sheriff's office. So these motivations to do minor level traffic stops, even if some of those are still there, we're getting to the root cause of rooting out. Why would an officer even ask that in the first place? You can actually see for yourself the data around traffic stops at our information and data dashboard. Now, I'll say this. Because I currently work at the sheriff's office and I've been there for 15 years, I often find myself saying like, hey, here's what we do, here's all the good stuff, but here, oh, by the way, is how I would change things. I remind folks that, Jerry, the current sheriff, is my boss. And I think we've done some pretty amazing things, but there's also been some restrictions around what we can do. And I'm not here for small policy changes. I'm really here to really change in very big ways. I will just say that part of what we're here to talk about is immigration. I was asked years ago to help rewrite the current immigration policy that is not just our policy, but is the policy for all agencies in the county. And just to give you a sense of what my values are, the very first thing I did was reach out to some of you who are in this room and say, look, I'm not an expert. We don't really know what we're doing around this. Can you sit around the table and help us understand this? And although you may not agree with everything I say, I mention that example because when I vote for someone, I'm thinking about what are their values. So just know that that is exactly what I did all those years ago. Not because I thought one day I'd be at the church campaigning for sheriff, and I want to use this as an example. I did that way back then because it was the right thing to do. Tomorrow we have the Community Violence Intervention Summit, another value-oriented thing. I get to facilitate that group, 300 people talking about violence. How does it relate to this? All I'm saying is my value has always been about investing in people, giving them a platform, letting them influence what our policies are, and moving forward. Thank you.
We are right on time.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to go do a troubleshoot. So thank you for that. I have just a couple of follow-up questions. For Alicia, could you talk a little bit more about how you envision training deputies around immigration in particular, and having deputies really understand that added layer of vulnerability and the all that's at stake for that. And Derek, if you wouldn't mind highlighting how you might update the policy that you helped to write 15 years ago, and to make it more contemporarily appropriate for our community. So.
Yeah, that's a really good training, because from my time working as a deputy at the sheriff's office, what happens is they put these policies in something called Power DMS. Everyone signs it, and then they don't think about it again. And there's really a lack of training, and there's been a lack of administrative presence in road patrol divisions, like briefings and stuff like that. So one of the core things I want to do with our immigration policy is make sure that whenever someone does come in our jail where there's a potential dangerous situation where ICE could be alerted for any reason, that this needs to go directly to the sheriff and the undersheriff. It is not simply enough to have command in the middle management level approve of or disapprove of these, because of the level of seriousness and the risk attached for people in our jail. And so I'm going to make sure that in those situations, it's the sheriff and undersheriff that are alerted, that make decisions on what happens with people in our jail when it comes to people in the immigrant community or people at risk of deportation. The other thing that I will do is properly train deputies on the policy, which means not just having them sign something on Power DMS. I never got immigration training as a deputy working there, and I was there for 10 years. And so this is a huge gap, because when administrators tell the public, we don't do this or we don't do that, they're not really looking and seeing what's happening on the ground to make sure what they're telling the public is truthful. And so what I will do is make sure I'm going to all the briefings and going to all the different divisions to make sure that they understand the policy. I also want to start, after I win the primary, my goal for different policy priorities is to start community-driven committees, so that way the community and officers and myself and my cabinet are all coming together to co-create and implement and train for the new policy. There's a lot of officers that simply don't understand some of the things that people go through in our community, especially in the immigration community or immigrant community, and they believe that like if someone's here illegally, then they should not be here. They don't understand. They don't have a level of empathy that I think is needed. And the way that you build that empathy is you do proper training. You're sharing people's stories. You're letting them know what could happen. I remember when I had a hit and run situation where someone was undocumented and they fled, we were able to use restorative justice, so that way they avoided the legal system. But I did that because I cared about them. I didn't realize that if I didn't do that, they could have been deported. I didn't know that as a deputy at the time. And so this is where you really have to make sure that your employees are properly trained and understand the repercussions to their actions. Thank you.
So just one quick point on training, I would say, which, we do this with young people in IPSI already. We give them an entire day where they run our orientation so that every new deputy is trained by some of the kids in the very neighborhoods that they would be patrolling in. I have an idea where I would love to have some of you doing that training around immigration, but even beyond that, what about some of you in this room sitting around on the panel that decides who gets hired as a deputy in the first place? Having community members really get to decide who has the values and the skills and the competencies to put on the badge. And so I know we're talking about specific policy issues, but some of this comes down to beliefs and values and how you're going to treat people when no one else is around. So I just wanted to comment on that. I will say that our current policy, although not perfect, people can parse certain words out of it. Before that policy, law enforcement, and I remind you, not just sheriff deputies, any agency now has this policy. Before this policy, law enforcement could enforce immigration in Washtenaw County. Now we cannot. Before this policy, we could actually ask when we're at your car door for a traffic stop what your status is. Now we cannot. Before this policy, someone could call 911 and say that I got a question about this person who I think is undocumented, and we would respond out. Now we cannot. So although it is not perfect, you asked how we might evolve it, I think one of the things we need to do is just what we did when we created it. I would love nothing more than to be able to sit back down with a group of individuals and say, where are we now all these years later? What is working? What might we evolve? National conversations have changed. Local ideas around this have changed. How might we shift this? I work for the sheriff. Some may think I'm the sheriff now. I will be one day, but I'm not now. So there are certain restrictions, right? And so we keep pushing the system, And I think we got us to a really good place to rebuild that foundation. But there are pieces of how we can evolve this and take it to the next level. One is around what happens around detainers in our jail. And so having that conversation and looking at that and saying, wait a minute, is this really the values we have and how do we put this forward in the future is a really, really important conversation. Again, I sometimes on this campaign trail find myself giving out facts. There's a reason why I keep saying playing politics with this issue is dangerous. If people just allude to the idea that we're doing an ICE raid, we're doing raids with ICE, that starts to put information in people's heads that is not true, right? Yes, has it happened before in the past? Absolutely. Do we do it now? No. So my point in always saying, here's what the current policy does, is not that I'm married to every fabric of the policy. It is making sure that in the process of campaigning for office, some people want the seat, but don't understand about how you do this around real leadership. It is important the words that we say. If I have community members who are afraid to call the police because they think we're doing ICE raids on a campaign trail, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice. So that's how we would evolve the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and we're moving on. I hope you're all capturing this because there will be follow-up questions, I'm sure, from you all. Here's our second issue, which is driver's licenses for all. Rich Stoller-Schulk, please.
So I think for those of you who aren't familiar with the issue of driver's licenses for all, it's important to remember that that used to be the policy in Michigan, but the law was changed in 2008 so that to get a driver's license or a state ID, people had to prove citizenship or lawful residence. So this is something new. 16 states and the District of Columbia allow driver's licenses for all. So this is not something that's unheard of. The Real ID Act at the federal level allows states to have driver's license access for everyone. And immigrants need to be able to get to work, to take their kids to medical care, to do the ordinary things that people need. People need ID cards to be able to do banking and other sorts of things that are important in our community. Immigrants make an important economic contribution. 5% of all agricultural workers in Michigan are immigrants, and that is a $100 billion industry in the state. So there are economic reasons, aside from all the moral reasons, of course, the public policy benefits. Do we want people to drive around uninsured, unlicensed, without the kind of training and screening that driver's licenses are required? Obviously not. As Pastor Deb mentioned before, it's a terrifying experience for undocumented people to drive around, which they have to do, of course, in the course of their everyday activities, and have to fear at any moment that they could be pulled over and that could potentially subject them to deportation and all the horrors that that might require. So fortunately, there is a package of bills in the state legislature, the Drive Safe package of legislation to restore driver's license access for all. And this has been endorsed by a number of law enforcement, business, advocacy, religious, and other organizations in the state. A couple of questions to get our discussion going here for the candidates. So one is, are you willing to not just support the Drive Safe package of legislation, but publicly make public your support? And if so, how and in what way? And given that both of you are running for the Democratic Party nomination, and we have a Democratic governor and Democratic legislature that have stalled this legislation and are sitting on it and not moved it out of committee, what do you plan to do to pressure our elected officials to make sure that they step up to the plate and do what's required?
So let me just say, it's cowardly that people will tell you they're going to do something, they get into office and election time hits, and then they decide, oh, it's too dangerous of a situation. If you're principle-based and you know what your values are, you do it. and then you live with the consequences of that. We have to have driver license for all. You took part of my answer because you laid out the reasons why it's so important, so this will be a quick synopsis or answer. It's about dignity. It's about public safety. Folks who have a driver's license, we all had to go through sometimes, even though minimal, at least some training, so you know people who are on the road are safe. It's about people being able to get to work. We were having a conversation in the back before this about just how broken our immigration system is and how local police wind up being facing the brunt of that broken system. And some of it is about traffic stops on the side of the road. Having a driver's license means that you feel safer as a driver. That when you get in interaction with an officer, you show that ID, you go on about your way, even if it's just a citation. I will say that Washtenaw, we did something pretty phenomenal years ago, right? The Washtenaw ID. Although that is not a driver's license, it did allow, at least in Washtenaw County, officers to see that identification, be able to identify you. And even if you were driving without a license, that's a citation. I don't have to arrest you to take you to jail, right? And so having that and really investing in that and making sure people know about how valuable that is still really important here in Washtenaw County. It's also about making sure our deputies are trained to understand that a foreign driver's license that is in English so that our officers can read it on the side of the road is a valid driver's license in the United States of America. So it's making sure that our officers understand that and training them appropriately. So anyway, I could go on and on about it, but the bottom line is we have to have it. I think having a sheriff that will elevate this to talk about the true public safety, how this makes us all less safe when people can't have identification, that's one way to push our elected officials to stand by their word. They made a commitment to us. And being unapologetic to say, this is our value, this is what you promised us, let me pull it up and remind you. And now because you're in the middle of election, you're cowardly to basically tell us, I'm sorry. And this is not the only issue. I'm a little bit frustrated with some Dems in the state. I love our local delegation, but we should not even be having this conversation around driver's license. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I support driver's license for all. I've also been helping out on that campaign. As a former road patrol deputy, I was able to talk to other law enforcement across the state about this, is it keeps everybody safer in so many ways. The situation I mentioned earlier, that was a hit and run incident when the person fled, it was a private parking lot crash. Really not a big deal. And when we were able to locate the person, they were so afraid, not only of me, but just afraid of the situation because they didn't have a license. And we were able to work out with the person that got their car hit, an agreement where he ended up paying the deductible so that way we could avoid charges. But it's things like that that really put people at risk, because if he had a license, he wouldn't have felt so afraid to where he had to run away just because he nicked a car in a parking lot. And so that's really important. I've been helping lobby with We the People on this and would strongly support it as sheriff, and not just support it as sheriff, but be an active partner in lobbying other law enforcement, including the Sheriff's Association and the unions, to be more supportive, because it really is a public safety issue. And I take that very seriously. And I think that, another really strong point on this is we already used to have it. And so, similar to other things going on, like good time in our prisons, where activists and organizers have been fighting to restore good time credits. We already had those at one point in Michigan. And so it's really making sure that we're going forwards, and also we're going back to some of the programs that weren't so political or controversial at one point in time. And giving the ability for everyone to have a driver's license is one of those programs. And so I definitely really support it. I wish that the state party would get on board and prioritize this. I will still be working with We the People to make sure it happens while I'm running this campaign. And then if it doesn't happen before then, as sheriff, I'll be strongly supporting it as well. Thank you.
Just a really brief follow-up. Specifically, has each of you contacted the governor's office and the legislators to support drive safe legislation, or what will you do to make that happen? Thank you.
So, not me personally, I've not contacted the governor's office, although I've helped the sheriff really write what he was gonna say in his testimony and send it over to the governor's office and then the state legislature. So again, I sometimes get in this weird spot because I work for the sheriff and that's his role to do it. Although I have been asked by some of you in this room, what's my stance on it? Would I be willing to? And absolutely, were I sheriff, I would be out front, really pounding the pavement to do some of this work. So, yeah.
Yes, I have, and I've been able to talk to other state reps that were actually, in particular, a barrier, as well as talk to at the state level, the police union. I talked to Sheriff Swanson and other sheriffs, because while it is great that we have a few law enforcement on board, my vision is the more law enforcement we can get on board with this, the better, because then it gives the representatives in that area some cover, because they're worried about getting unseated in some of these more purple areas. And so, yes, I have, and I will continue to do this work. Thank you.
Another issue that has been brought up in our area is license plate readers. And so Ruth Cassidy is going to talk to us and our candidates about that.
Hello. So mass surveillance tech used by ICE has dramatically expanded under the Trump administration. This includes automated license plate readers, which collect various information about all vehicles passing by the license plate readers. And then data is stored in a massive database that ICE and other law enforcement agencies can access. So in 2017, ICE entered into a contract with a mass surveillance company called Vigilant Solutions, who has a main competitor named Flock that has proposed license plate readers for Ypsilanti Township. This contract with ICE gave access to a large database and the technology. So this kind of mass surveillance raises concerns about privacy rights, especially for immigrants and their families, because these are directly targeted by ICE. So note that ICE is not required to have a warrant to access these databases necessarily. A FOIA revealed that ICE routinely searches the databases without probable cause, entering rationale like investigation into nefarious activity for reasonings for using this database. So the Biden administration has continued to use this expansion of mass surveillance technology, including under FIRM, the Family Expedited Removal Management. So where it comes to local issues, in 2022, Ypsilanti Township proposed blanketing the township with over 60 automated license plate readers, which would record many vehicles driving through Washtenaw County and record data on all vehicles. So my question to the candidates are, do you support this kind of technology? And if so, what would you implement in order to protect privacy rights and immigrant rights or especially immigrant rights to privacy?
Yeah, I do not support license plate reader technology, and actually was organizing with the Washtenaw Regional Organizing Coalition to stop the sheriff's office and the township from using and implementing 60 to 70 readers that they were proposing to put around the community. The good thing is we won. We did halt the implementation. And the reason that I don't support license plate reader technology is because it puts immigrant communities at risk. It puts women at risk. They also showed, not only do they share data with ICE, some of these companies, they also were sharing data with anti-choice states. We are in a political climate right now where we have to be really careful at the local level with what data we are gathering, because we don't know what could happen at the state and the national level. And the GOP, they have this project plan that they talk about where they want to help galvanize ICE and use deputies and sheriff's office to do that. And so it's not enough to say, which the current sheriff's office, and it was their view that they would have this great policy and the license plate reader technology wouldn't be misused. That's just not true. And you can have a great policy in this arena and it's still going to cause hazards for people, and you're still collecting a lot of data that could get turned over to ICE and anti-choice states with how law enforcement agencies do investigations. And so it's really about protecting people's privacy. Also, these companies have high error rates. 1 in 10 times they get it wrong. There have been situations where officers have pulled over the wrong car because the license plate reader technology misread a 7 for a Z. Next thing you know, they're doing a felony stop on a vehicle, which is where you call someone out at gunpoint, and they didn't even do anything wrong. And so the error rates are through the roof, the technology is a hazard, and as the only candidate that actually organized to stop this in this township, as sheriff, I will continue with that same energy, calling out how problematic ALPR license plate reader technologies are. Thank you.
So again, this is why I love conversations like this, because we actually get to talk directly to the people around what some of the facts are related to license plate readers, and also what's happened here locally. We will never have license plate readers in patrol cars. That often gets forgotten. We will never have that under a Sheriff Jackson. We will never use Sheriff's Office dollars to purchase them. I will be honest with you, a local city or township, I cannot stop them if they wanted to get them. I can stop our officers from using them. So that's a little bit of a nuance, and people say, well, that's too nuanced. That's just a fact. So when we were asked by Ypsilanti Township, they said, we are going to order license plate readers. Pause. You got to tell the community. So for a fact, the community would not have known until it was on the township's agenda, and they were just going to buy them. Sheriff Clayton said, we are not having this conversation unless the public has input. So it was my job within those confines to design a system, within those restrictions, to design a system to listen and hear from community. So I will say that again. The township would have just ordered them and put them up had we not said, you have to talk to community first and put that information out. That's a part of what my role is. We were not saying that this is our technology. They asked us, would you use the technology? And based on all the feedback from community, if you go through and you listen to the presentation, or you actually read the document that I put together, every single category of, we would not use them if it did this, this, or this. We wouldn't use them if it was used for minor level crimes around immigration or around like minor traffic stops. We wouldn't use them if they were only in particular neighborhoods. We wouldn't use them if that had facial recognition technology. We wouldn't use them if they were the privacy where information could be shared somewhere else. So although people will now take and parse those words and say, well, the sheriff is all for them and they were gonna do this, here's the reality. If we wanted them, and if we were to say to Ypsi Township, the sheriff at the time, Jerry, was to say, I want them, they would have gotten them. The reason we do not have them is the way in which we design the process to work with community, hear from community. And yes, there were some really good folks out there pushing against these things, but just to be factual around like how this got out to the community and why we don't have them currently in Ypsi Township is because of the way, within the confines of government, we designed the system to hear from and lay out a process. The last part I will say is, there is no way to stop a city or a township, because there are places in our community, a small neighborhood that already has license plate readers. Now, I can't stop them from buying them. What we can do is talk about how we would or would not use them and what the limitations are for that. So just a little background on license plate readers and kind of where we stand and why we actually do not have them is because the way in which we designed the process and heard all the information, put it out to community and said, here are the facts. If you can't operate within these facts, we can't have them.
Thank you for your responses. I guess my follow-up is, if one of the townships or cities or other municipalities were to add the automated license plate readers, what would you do to prevent ICE from accessing that data?
So I'm an organizer, and so if that happened, I would be in partnership with organizers who would actually push against that, because it really was the organizers that actually halted the implementation. It was not the sheriff's office. When they did do that survey, the majority of the community said they don't want the license plate reader technology, and then the sheriff still said that he would use it if the township were to purchase it. The township's not gonna purchase technology. I mean, they can if they want, but they typically would not if we're not gonna use it, because then what's the point of the technology? And so no matter what happens, we are not using license plate reader technology under my sheriff's administration. I don't think it is, again, it's a hazard. I don't think it's reliable. And I think it really does put people at risk. And I think if we do use it, then what we do is we tell the public that we're not listening to you, given that the majority of people said they do not want this mass surveillance technology. Thank you.
So again, this was one of the biggest pieces that really, again, I wrote the language and it says right in there, if it cannot be kept internally and it's shared with a third party like ICE, we will not use it. So it was written then, that's what the policy was, that's what we said, and there was no way around it. If it was to be shared with ICE, like you just laid out, we would not use that technology. Again, we can't stop someone from buying it, but we would not use it. So if I wasn't clear before, that's what's already written, that's what we presented on, and said if you can't do this, we would never use it. So if that was to happen, we would not use that technology.
Okay. Moving right along here, we are on our fourth issue, and back to Deborah Dean Ware to present that to our candidates.
Thank you. So there's a reason why I asked the first question and I'm asking this question. I had a dear friend, we'll call him Bill. I have permission to share this anonymously, who was stopped in Ann Arbor by Ann Arbor police on a traffic stop for turning on a yellow or red light. The officers who stopped him, which again were not sheriff deputies, they were Ann Arbor police officers, took his international license, reversed the names in their database, and saw that there was a warrant for a brown man with a similar name, right? Who had never lived in the area of the driver's license, so on and so forth. So these police officers were unable to distinguish between the differences of Latino names and how they're ordered. And so they detained him. They asked for IDs for all the people in the car as well. Again, Ann Arbor police, not sheriff. But they did take him in, and he was taken in custody over a weekend. He saw two different judges who released him on bail. His wife was in the parking lot waiting for him to be released, and the jail said that there was an ICE hold. They kept him in the Washtenaw jail for 17 more hours so that immigration could pick him up. And it led to deportation. So that's why I asked the traffic stop, because it started there with the Ann Arbor police, but then continued in the Washtenaw County Jail. Two judges had already released on bail. And we've had conversations with Derek about this, but this idea of how we protect our immigrant neighbors and friends in custody, and how do we train people, and Alicia, you already mentioned this a little bit about who makes those determinations, because I think we found that immigration had created something that looked like an official warrant but wasn't actually an official warrant, and so there was a training issue, right? But all of that led to the violence of this deportation, a husband being taken away from his wife, his children, being sent to a very dangerous part of his home country. And so my question is, the policy states that there will not be holds except for federal warrants, right? So there is a policy to hold if there's a federal warrant for immigration, correct? So is that something that can be changed if possible? And then how can you reassure us that the people making the decisions in the county jail, looking at whatever paperwork might be sent over from immigration, and making the determinations to hold people past their bail release, and then being taken into custody by immigration. So there was a name issue, a mistaken identity, and then this fake warrant that ICE had somehow gotten into the sheriff's department. So we'll start there. And I would love to hear more about your decision-making around the undersheriff and the sheriff.
Yeah, so this is a tragic situation. I think one of the things about leadership is you got to admit when you do something wrong, right? And here's the reality. Nothing leading up to that person coming into the jail had anything to do with their immigration status as far as us booking them into jail. Here's where the issue came in. And it only got found out, and this is again going back to the values, we only found out about this because of the relationship with folks that we can have to open the door to the sheriff's office and say, wait, what's going on here? ICE literally created a form that looks like a warrant that has everything but a judge's signature on it. And our staff, who were trained to only accept warrants, saw that as a warrant. And unfortunately, what you just described actually happened. It's a tragedy. But the ability to say, like, nope, that's wrong. The reason is when you look at the sheriff's office policy today and it says it was created in 2023, is because of this situation, right? We learned, we updated it, and now it isn't just you look at the face value, you see it says warrant, you gotta like do all these other steps to verify it's an actual warrant. So it was a mistake. Like you have to just admit there's a mistake and you gotta change it and you gotta evolve and you gotta move forward. There is nothing else to say about that part of it. I will say this, but this is the problem with the broken immigration system on the national level that didn't use its local law enforcement and puts us in this quandary of like, what do we do in this? So federal warrant from a judge, a real warrant, you honor a warrant from a judge, a criminal warrant from a judge, right? So yes, you would do that. But making sure it's an actual warrant, the reality is, and you can vouch for this, ICE created a form to try and fool local law enforcement that they had warrants when they really didn't. That tells you the kind of environment that we're in and why we need to be vigilant, why we need to do these things all the time, why we need to be continuing to educate our community and to learn and to adapt and to sit back down and look at policies, because that's the nature of the beast that we're fighting at. And it goes back to part of your question around driver's license. When you have elected officials that know these are dangerous issues but refuse to take any action, we're going to continue to use local police to deal with these symptoms because we're too afraid to actually address the root causes. So I'm sorry that that happened. I really, really am. We would not have known that that happened had it not been for some of the folks in this audience who had the access to unlock the door, come into the sheriff's office, and really look at our stuff with us and say, whoa, wait a minute, this is actually what happened here. So I hope that answers your question.
First, I'll say as sheriff, I'm going to make sure I know what's going on in my jail. This is a really important issue, which is why this current policy in effect now is actually dangerous. The policy says that considerations for honoring an ICE detainer include, but may not be limited to, several exceptions. There are other sheriffs in this country that have ended cooperation with ICE on voluntary detainers, and I'm willing to do that because it's the right thing to do, and because in less than 2% of situations does ICE actually ever have a warrant. They're almost always voluntary detainers. And our policy right now in effect that was crafted by this current administration has allowed for ICE to operate in this way. The policy also mandates sheriff's office employees to refer people to ICE when people call to try to report somebody, which is irresponsible and again, dangerous. There is other policies that say employees, and this is like Cook County, Illinois, they have one, where it says that no employee of the sheriff's office should dedicate any resources to talking to ICE. We are not partners with ICE. We should not be partners with ICE. The other part I want to make clear in the policy is it does allow for us to accompany ICE on raids in certain circumstances. That is also not best practice. I actually do, because I've been getting attacked on this so much, we drafted a new policy and we used it off of the model policy with the Immigration Resource Law Center that I have with me that I can show you to explain that this is possible. This policy is not the best that we can get. This policy is dangerous. I also shared the policy with immigration lawyers and experts who said that it's infuriating. The other part of the policy that's really problematic is we participate in the criminal alien legal program, which basically means that upon request, we give ICE information from our jail. That is in the sheriff's office policy. That does not have to be there. This policy is irresponsible, and I know that there's been statements that it was co-created with people in the immigrant community, but a lot of the people in the immigrant community I've talked to said that that was not what they wanted. And so we have to be honest about this, and we have to implement policies that actually will protect immigrant communities. And then I'll say something to the training. Under my sheriff's administration, every corrections officer is gonna know how to read a warrant. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't know why I went back and sat down. But so my follow-up question for Derek is, how is it that ICE is alerted to potential people in custody? And so how did that conversation happen in this particular case? Because there was evidence that this had been happening. So that's my question for you. Like, where is that communication between the people in the jail and immigration? And Alicia, my question just flew from my head. I would be curious how you will communicate your new policy to the immigrant community so that they understand it well, because I think there's the policies and then how we communicate that to the larger community. And for us as advocates, how do we help communicate that as well, so that we really truly could be a sanctuary county where people can thrive?
So, it's not a debate, so I'm gonna stay with the question. I will just say that I'm happy to have this conversation, really, with anyone who wants to kind of walk through some of the details of policy, and I really encourage you. A policy are some words, you can parse through it and read out a sentence here and do this or do that. Here's the reality. Anyone right now in this room, legally, can see who's in our jail. So we cannot keep that list from ICE, right? We can't. Because if your family member's in jail, you have a right to know that they're there. You have a right now to see everybody in the jail. It's a publicly available list. I guess our problem was we actually just put the facts in the policy and said, we have to share this with ICE. Not that they're an exception to the rule. In those co-creating conversations, we wanted the community, the immigrant community, to know that this was actually happening. So we could take it out of the policy, but anyone sitting up here saying as sheriff they wouldn't give that list to ICE, they would be violating the law. You have to produce that public document. So that's really the difference. I'll just say this on Cook County. Someone sent me this policy. If you just read the language of Cook County, you can also say that I'm disturbed by that policy. Why? Because one of the first things it says in there is we will not honor ICE detainers unless the federal government will pay us. To me, that is disturbing. If you will pay us in full, now Cook County Jail is open to the public. So again, I don't know operationally what they're doing, but any policy, you can pull out certain components and say, wait, why is this like this? Let's talk about operationally what's really, really happening down in the jail. And I'll just tell you, there is a public safety exception that I already said under me, we would reevaluate that exception. But the folks who fall into that exception, 4 people who had committed rape, 6 for domestic violence, child pornography, strangulation, domestic violence, those fall into those exceptions. And here's why it literally is making my voice crack even saying that. Because me having to say that feeds into Donald Trump and the bigots narrative about the undocumented community and the violence that they perpetuate. So you don't hear me going around talking about what's actually in the policy around who's actually in that public safety exception. But for this audience, I think it's important for you to know. And for the undocumented community, we are not asking about your immigration status. As law enforcement, we cannot enforce that on the road. We are not doing ICE raids. We haven't done that in years. And finally, if you come into the jail, save for the mistake that was actually made, if you come into the jail, if you're a violent offender, you fall into that exception. If you are not, if you're there for a small warrant or something like that, you don't fall into that exception. You are not getting connected to ICE. We are denying detainers. So, lots to say about this issue, but the reality is you can parse certain words. What goes along with policy is training. What goes along with training is oversight. That's how you manage behavior in the system.
Yeah, so the sheriff's office policy says, upon request, the sheriff's office provides a list of all inmates housed in the jail to the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Criminal Alien Program for the purpose of assisting in the identification of individuals within the jail who are foreign nationals, deportable non-citizens who are alleged to have committed a crime or have been convicted of a crime. That's from the sheriff's office policy. What a better policy can say. The sheriff's office shall not provide immigration authorities or persons or entities contracted for immigration enforcement purposes access to any records unless pursuant to a judicial warrant, which then would be required by federal or state law. Again, it's never the case that ICE has judicial warrants. It is extremely, extremely rare. We can actually tell ICE no. We can end partnership with them. There are other sheriff's offices that have done this across the country. It's possible. This policy right here, the fact that we are participating upon request and using our tax dollars to talk and communicate with ICE is a problem. It needs to change, it can change. And in the sample draft policy that I was able to work on with the Immigration Resource Law Center, it is best practice. We have items in the policy to actually protect immigrant communities. The other thing I'll say is I would love to work with the immigrant community as I've been doing now. I want to share this policy with We the People, with Wicker, to get feedback, to see if there's other things we can add into it, especially when it comes to mutual aid and really just empowering immigrant communities, because oftentimes undocumented people don't have access to the same resources or supports that people do. And so I would love to see what I can do as sheriff to help fill those gaps as well. Thank you.
Well, I want to give great thanks to our panel members for bringing us and raising up and asking the questions, and to the two candidates for both of them really speaking to how they want to interface with the immigrant community and with us, the allies. So we've got a great start, but here comes the exciting part, which is that you, who have been sitting there and listening all this time, have a chance to ask questions and make comments. And Rich, if you want to take, please, the microphone. And again, during this time, as long as you're not, go have something to eat or drink if you need to, or go to the bathroom. But as long as we keep our attention here, because you all deserve to be able to ask these questions and they deserve to answer them. So.
Can I ask a question? What would be better for the audience in terms of timekeeping? Should I stand and
Yes.
face the
Thank you, Nancy, if you can. Nancy is our timekeeper, and we're most appreciative for her. Everyone has behaved so well today in terms of their time limits. It's wonderful, but we still need you. So 2 minutes to speak, please, 2 minutes to respond.
Yeah, and I will, if I see a question on chat, I'll raise my hand.
Perfect.
So as Marianne said, there's coffee and cookies in the kitchen anytime you want, and bathrooms downstairs. 2 minutes for question or comment, so there's no need to disguise your comment as a question. Just feel free. And then each of the candidates will have a couple of minutes to respond.
Yes, I know that this campus is not yet constructed, and regardless of the fact that thousands of people showed up in protest against the building of Cop City, it is likely to be built. Though it yet does not exist, would you actually send any officer to be trained there? It is quite close to Fort Benning, the School of the Americas, and I have a deep feeling that it is only a continuation of the School of the Americas practices. So would you send any officers to be trained there?
I just want to say that the question is referring to a place outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we're really good at is, honestly, is really training and curriculum development. We are very picky now, and we will stay very picky and have high standards in the kind of training, regardless of where it is, what that training is, who's putting that training on, and what are our officers getting out of it. Because we have some pretty significant values that, although were foundational for Sheriff Clayton, will stay under a Sheriff Jackson administration. how you treat people, how you think about the world, implicit bias, managing interpersonal interactions, verbal de-escalation. And so it's really about what the training is, regardless of where physically it's at. Will we send our staff or will we not send our staff? I know a little bit about Cop City, but I don't know enough about it to say we will never send someone there if there was a quality training that was there. So not trying to elude it, I just don't know enough about some of the specifics related to that. But for training in general, it is really all about who's doing the training, what are the values, what is really behind that training, and we have some very high standards. The mental health training that we created here at
I'm making myself a sandwich and you
that
approved it.
training is now the required training, or the nucleus
I'm
of
making
that
a
training,
panini.
is now the required training in every single police academy across the state of Michigan. I'll say it again, the training we created here with those high standards is now a part of every police academy in the state of Michigan. So we have very high standards, and we would not just send our folks to some fancy new building down in Atlanta just because it is this fancy new building. It would really about evaluating what the training is.
Yeah, I don't support that. I don't believe we should be using taxpayer dollars or any department resources to send cops in our county to go train in Cop City. So I would not support that as sheriff. Also, I really think we have to reevaluate the trainings we're using. There is a particular training called the READ technique, which is extremely harmful and teaches officers to be extremely judgmental when they interview people. John Oliver actually did a skit on it and speaks about it more eloquently than I can, or at least more humorously, but it is a very harmful training. It was used to wrongfully convict the Central Park now exonerated 5. It puts people at risk for wrongful convictions. And what's really sad about this training is the sheriff's office is using it, and it was developed pre-civil rights era. It's archaic.
What do you want now?
And so many of our law enforcement trainings are outdated, developed by people in the 50s, 60s, and we need to take a second look at what we're using and what we're spending money on, because they spent thousands on this training that is not based on any science. There is a police detective that actually wrote a book about how bad this training was, because he was horrified when he was working and realized that the way he interviewed somebody led to them falsely confessing to something they didn't do. And so you even have some police consulting companies calling this training out. And so I want to make sure we're reevaluating that. And any trainings that go along with this warrior mindset that teach officers to be at war with the communities they are supposed to be protecting and serving, I will not condone or allow to happen at the sheriff's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Laura Sanders and Ramiro Martinez, and we have been involved in the Washtenaw Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Rights for many years, since the beginning. We started in 2008. And I feel like there's a little bit of rewriting of history going on, because we were very involved, because we collected data on people getting stopped, and at one point 30% of detainments and deportations in Washtenaw County were started by a local traffic stop. And that's how we got very involved in talking with the police. But we had a very hard time getting connected to Sheriff Clayton. And we actually, he did say that they weren't asking people about immigration status. So we had to show up at a situation that was very painful, and we basically had to prove to him that his deputies were doing that, which then enabled us to finally get a meeting with him. And it may have been Derek's social work background that helped to make that happen, but it was a push. And out of that came these policies. We always were conflicted by and confused by much of the language in these policies because they are not clear. And in this last situation that Pastor Deb has talked about, who she named the person Bill, we did end up with 2 meetings with Derek. I thought it was going to be with Clayton, but it wasn't. Derek, we had 2 meetings, but I had to push. Okay, I had to push push for months to get those meetings, and there has been one promise that has never come through.
Do either of you want to respond to that? Or shall we just take the comment? Okay.
Were there any responses?
No response. Oh,
Yeah, I just want to,
I'm sorry. Just another point of order, excuse me, is that you may direct it at one or the other or both of the candidates. So you don't have to ask, make sure you have a question or comment for each of them. It's fine either way.
yeah, I just want to validate that I'm really sorry that happened. And I remember being a deputy at the office when some of that was going down, and it was extremely heartbreaking. One of the administrators called me because they wanted to make sure that no children called 911 because they didn't know where their parents were. And that's when I found out we were cooperating with ICE, because we accompanied them on the raids. And this is why I think we need a sheriff that actually has law enforcement experience, because it's not enough to just say we're not doing something to the public when that's not actually what's happening on the ground. We have to have better training, and the policy that we have is actually extremely problematic, and it needs to be changed. So thank you.
I was going to let just the comment go because I'm not Jerry Clayton. He can defend himself. You can talk to him about his decisions. I'll just say he is one of the national leaders in this space. He's on 12 amicus briefs around immigration. The national ACLU will call him about this, but I'm not here to defend him. He's not running for office. He's retiring. He's earned his retirement. I will just say that even in those situations, it is part of my job to unlock that door. So within the confines and the restrictions in my current role, there's a reason that I was the person that eventually got to meet with folks. And although we can't always do everything we want to do, it's part of my job to unlock that door and allow community voice in. And that's what happened in this particular case. So I'll kind of leave it there on some of the back and forth of it. I will also just say one last thing about the policy. To be really clear, the reason we might ever be at a situation where ICE is for keeping the peace. It is for making sure that our staff can be there to make sure no crimes happen. It's not to do anything with raids. And it is, in the policy, provide support or services appropriate to the circumstances. Support or services for affected family members, meaning the undocumented community who may have someone deported. It is not to work hand in hand with ICE. That's in the policy. Not perfect, but just to make sure that we're clear with our community. If you see a sheriff's deputy patrol car after the fact, mind you, now in recent years, ICE does not ever want us to know what they're doing, because what do? Laura found out about it. How does Laura find out about it? Either she knows from the community or we're in communication about these things. And so the reality is that's why you might see a patrol car, not because we're out there trying to participate in ICE raids. This is what I mean by we just have to make sure we put the full information out there around these issues.
And then, a bunch of people who want to ask questions, so we'll then return to people. I think afterwards we'll have time for everyone to kind of mill around and follow up on some of the details. So we have question here and question here, and Pastor Jeff.
The issue of people running away from police has been raised. And I think that there's one core reason that people run away from law enforcement officers, and that's a lack of trust, and that's a fear about what's going to happen to them if they stay put. And it's especially important when we're talking about brown and black people. So my question, I have two questions. My first question is to both of you. Do you have any concerns about how these campaigns might be influencing people's trust in law enforcement in the community? And my second question is a follow-up. What have you done systemically or individually in your past to build that kind of trust? And in the future, what will you do to repair the trust that's been broken and to continue to build relationships with the community. Because I think, and I like to write, I'm a communicator, you can have a perfectly written policy. You can have all the best practices. Mistakes are going to be made. People like Trump are going to be put into office. So if we don't have trust and relationships in the community, we're not going to be safe, not any of us.
Thank you for that question. I think that trust is built by being honest, and given that the current Sheriff's Office administration has been dishonest with the public about a number of things, it has really eroded trust in the community. There are some people that told me, like, don't talk about how they cooperate with ICE in the jail because it's going to scare people. What's scary is they're cooperating with ICE in the jail. The policy is scary. And honestly, a lot of immigrant communities already know this. They're not dumb. Same with, communities in Eastern Washtenaw County where I spent a lot of time patrolling. The reason they're running away from the police, the reason they're scared of the police is absolutely because of decades of oppression and trauma. And if we as law enforcement don't, A, be honest with the public, but B, change how we treat people, this is gonna keep happening. And honestly, there's been so much harm done in some communities that trust might never be built. And so at the minimum, we need to reduce the harm that we're causing, which is why I want to reduce unnecessary traffic stops, why I want to reduce unnecessary enforcement that is really created a situation where Black people in our county are 11.1 times more likely to be arrested for nonviolent low-level offenses, and that's a sheriff's office. That's at the sheriff's office. That's not counting all the other agencies in our county. Black children in our county, it was 8 times more likely to be arrested, and now it's jumped up to almost 11. We're doing something really wrong, and one of the ways that we can change it, and that I can help add value to this arena as sheriff, is to reduce unnecessary traffic stops, because that is one of the biggest ways that people get funneled into our legal system. And then as a deputy, being from the community where I worked, I thought was hugely important, because I didn't look at the community like I was at war with the community. It was my community. And so I was able to go to work, and I would put on festivals in the parks. I would do carpool karaoke with kids. And what I found when I was earning the trust of the community is that oftentimes when they needed help, they never felt safe to call. And this especially actually impacts undocumented women that could be in domestic violence situations. Thank you.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very violent community. We had horrible relationships with police. My first interaction with a police officer, I was a kid in the front seat, tells you how old I am, with no seatbelt on. My dad gets pulled over, and I know what we do when we get pulled over. We open the glove box, we get the registration and insurance, and we hand it to the officer. And before the officer could get to the window, as soon as I went to open that glove box, he literally backhands me. Boom. Don't ever do that. They'll kill you. That's my reality. My mother, who is white, never tried to tell me about the Black experience in America. And I get emotional about it because it hits at the pit of my stomach and who I am. And so I refuse to be lectured about what the impact on Black and brown communities are for folks coming from outside of our community to tell us what we need to really be doing. This is personal for me. I'm not running for sheriff because I got some high ego. It actually is very difficult for me to say I statements. Look at me. I'm running because these issues really matter in people's lives. So what have we actually done? My entire role at the sheriff's office is not just about hugging babies and doing these fun programs. It's changing the very foundation and the culture of law enforcement. So whether it's just cuz and it's 5 kids and 5 officers having lunch together and talking just because we should be, whether it is impact where there's 60 people in a room talking about the issues of policing and building solutions, whether it is creating a co-response unit where there's a social worker and a police officer together so you don't only interact with police, whether it is the 24/7 crisis line that right now you can call so you don't have to call 911 for a mental health crisis. You can call the social workers. That was created for our deputies, but it worked so well, it is now public for anyone. So some of it is about the feel-good things and building relationships, but some of it is because the reality, like in my childhood, I didn't trust police. I didn't grow up trusting police. There's gonna be a limit, a healthy limit. What I wanna make sure though, think about who's tearing down and who's bringing people together.
All right, Mark Hergod, 111 Miles, Ypsilanti, Michigan. I'm a technocrat by nature, and I worry about exceptions that are turned into the rule. The public safety exception for allowing ICE to remove people, well, it's an exception, so it will be exploited. But also, we are a rich community with a court system and a strong prison system. If we're exporting these ostensibly violent people, we're sending them to an impoverished community that does not have as strong of a prison system or a strong court system. It's a violation of those impoverished communities. It is a violation of home rule, and it's a violation of due process. What if the person that is accused of these violent crimes didn't do them? Well, they're going to be sent thousands of miles away, and they have no day in court. And that is the comment that I would like to make.
So just want to make sure, Zoom people, we have 25 people online, just so you know. Currently, this is by a question from Melanie Harner. Currently, as community members continue to be deported due to continued local traffic stops, there continues to be consistent fear and confusion among the local Washtenaw Latinx community. I know that many don't report some local issues with traffic stops now because they believe it's useless to report as they have no confidence in the sheriff's department. How will you proceed to make amends and make the affected community aware of the policies so that we could know what should truly be supported or reported?
Yeah, I think one thing, in part of the question, I think it's important for us to gather the facts around traffic stops equaling deportation. There's an exception, the one case that you alluded to around this fake warrant, but violent crime or violent offenders is very different, right? That's in the current policy. I'll talk about in the future. I think how do you really make sure you make amends? When we first started this, I'll never forget it was one of the most impactful, powerful learning experiences for me. We had family members around the table. We had our command staff around the table, family members of undocumented community, sharing their stories, sharing their journey. And it wasn't just some check-the-box training. You were looking across the table, and they were teaching you about their experience. And our officers were sitting there learning and genuinely engaged. And you cannot forget those. To me, that is the best way to break down these barriers and build trust. Over breaking bread, I learn you, you learn me. I'll never forget your story, so the next time I happen to come in contact with someone who might be undocumented, I'm thinking about you. I don't know any other better way than to train our staff, than to do those kinds of things. So how do you build trust? It is about just getting the word out there, having conversations like this. One of the things that is, I think, different between me and Sheriff Clayton is really known nationally. The governor calls him on a regular basis. He's spoken at the United Nations as the law enforcement representative. My focus has always been solely here in Washtenaw County. It's about building those relationships. I mentioned all the programs that we've already designed and developed. I would love nothing more to be able to now re-engage in a way that makes it so that this isn't just some far-off conversation. Why don't we have the committee that helped to craft this, reevaluate, but also to stay connected, to continue to do these things around how do you actually make sure the community understands it? How can they question it? How do we make sure we don't just wait till something bad happens? How do we make sure that they're a part of hiring our deputies and training them? I think all of those are ways that you systematically build trust. And all it takes is one incident for that trust to erode and for us to move backwards.
Yeah, I think, this is actually very near and dear to my heart because I started, when I decided to run for sheriff, because I really felt things had to change at our current sheriff's administration, I did a listening tour and talked with folks all across our county and talking with some folks in the immigrant community, and telling them, I'm gonna end cooperation with ICE. They say, we've heard that before. And part of building trust is making sure that we're being honest and not lying to them. And the current sheriff's administration has been incredibly deceptive and has lied to the immigrant community. And when that happens, it's really hard to build trust back. My job when I become sheriff is to make sure that I implement a policy that ends cooperation with ICE. I don't believe we need all these exceptions. I do not want any resources or my employees using any resources to talk to ICE. I'm gonna make sure that if the chance someone does come in our jail and their immigrant status comes up, it goes directly through me and the undersheriff. It is not, it's a level of seriousness that needs to be handled by the upper administration, not middle management. And then I really want to make sure that I am being an active listener and actually showing up. People shouldn't have to wait 2-3 months to get a meeting with the sheriff about something so important. The sheriff shouldn't have to get alerted by immigrant communities on what's going on in their own jail. They should know that. You're the sheriff. And so I will make sure that I'm present, I'm actively listening, I'm working with our community, and I will be working with the other chiefs in this county to make sure that they are also on the same page as us. And I have oversight as sheriff, I will have oversight of our jail. And so a lot of traffic stops that lead to arrests, people end up in our jail. And that is a way that we can really protect people by not cooperating with ICE and making sure that no one is getting deported from our jail because of our lack of action on this issue. And over time, that is really how you build trust. Thank you.
Okay, I'm confused about the ICE between your opinions. So I think I have a good, well, I'll wait until okay. I think I have a good idea of what you're saying, that right now ICE is communicating the sheriff's office and in the jail. I believe, and I might be wrong, you are kind of saying that is not the case. And when we look at Facebook pages of your posts, you post exactly what you're saying here, and you post that she is spreading misinformation. So I need to be clear on what is the misinformation, and either we are communicating with ICE through the sheriff's office and the jail, or we're not. I'm confused, even though you've both answered and there was maybe clarity that I didn't notice.
Yeah, I'll stay consistent. You know, I know that we're cooperating with ICE in our jail because I worked there. And so it was said in other forums that we weren't, and it just wasn't true, to which I pulled out the policy to prove my point. I also have a sample draft policy that I want to share with folks and would love to continue discussion on this matter because there are several points in our policy that need to be changed. And if we get anything from this work, my goal is to make that happen either before I'm sheriff, or if they don't do it before then, when I'm sheriff. And I also want to say that everything I'm saying is not misinformation. This is based on multiple receipts. I have the policy, we have data. The Syracuse University FOIA'd immigration enforcement and found that we cooperated with ICE on voluntary detainers once a month during the Trump administration on average. That data is out there. We don't have the current sheriff's office data. In fact, it'd be great if they would share that. But that's another thing that we need to do, is we need to share that data with the public. Saying that the tactics like you're spreading misinformation and stuff like that don't work when you have the evidence on deck. Thank you.
Yeah, really good question. I think specifically, if you've been watching any of the forums, the original forum, the conversation started around how are our officers interacting on the street, and alluding to the idea that we were doing ICE raids with them. That is the part where I say, that's misinformation. Even alluding to that, it is not true and never has been true, right? Since we have done this policy and put some things in place. So yes, there was an incident that happened years ago, but that is not what has been happening in recent years. So that's what I mean by the misinformation. As it relates to the jail, here's where, again, words matter. Now, it may seem like subtle differences, but if I'm someone at home who's worried about this, and I'm thinking that if I get a minor level traffic stop, the sheriff's office is communicating with ICE and I'm gonna be deported, that is not happening, right? Now, if I'm someone who committed a heinous crime or have been alleged to commit a heinous crime, under the current policy, there is an exception there. So there's the policy, and when I talk about the misinformation part, is alluding to the idea or the notion that every single person who's undocumented, who has a minor level traffic stop and might wind up in our jail, that's not true, right? So, might be getting into the weeds, but that's what I mean by the difference between misinformation. You have to really be intentional about the information we're talking about. Is it perfect? No. I've already said I would welcome the opportunity for us to go back and look at the policy, in particular, the public safety exception. That is not a debate for me. What I'm talking about, though, is how we talk about this, saying that right now, if you come into our jail for a minor level traffic stop, you might be deported, is not true. Because just as much as people can talk about those public safety exceptions, there's also a large number of those who we just deny for these minor level situations.
So we have time for 2 more questions, and then there's going to be time over coffee and cookies if anybody wants to stay around and chat.
So this is a comment, but I think as we're all gathered in this room, I just want to say that under those public safety exceptions, the domestic violence stuff should be an enormous concern for us, because in our county, it's one of the largest areas where people get convicted of serious crimes. And we have a policy where our prosecutor's office will not forward any of those cases to restorative justice processes. So we're opening up that conversation. But I'm just saying, particularly in a domestic violence conflict, you want to be able to ask for help without fearing somebody's necessarily going to jail, be convicted of a felony, deported. So we have to put that on our agenda, whatever happens in this election.
That's also my question too. Thank you, Joseph.
Hi, I'm Kathy Wyatt, and I do work for the Sheriff's Office, and I've been involved in immigration issues since before I came to work for the Sheriff's Office. I was part of the original LCLC, Latino Community Liaison Committee, working on these issues, which were made, that most of the committee members were in fact Latino. And I think there's some confusion here. I mean, one, there is a lot of misinformation around what is going on and what the Sheriff's Office does and does not do. And I think part of that is everybody thinks of ICE in terms of the ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations, part of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They are the ones that are involved in deportations. Under Immigration and Customs Enforcement, you also have, they also do a lot of investigation and enforcement around human trafficking. Many of the Latino community, the immigrant community, refugees community tend to be victims. And yes, the Sheriff's Office will cooperate around criminal actions where we're talking human trafficking. ICE, in terms of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also does anti-terrorism work. And it is not as simple as some people who don't understand what's going on try to make it. I can tell you this in terms of trust with the Latino community. Back during the Trump administration, they were making changes to DACA. They were talking about making changes to DACA. I know. They came to the Sheriff's Office campus to meet because they trusted us.
Yes, so my name is Janan Hamoud, and I am a first-generation immigrant. My husband is also a first-generation immigrant from El Salvador, and he came here as a refugee. And I know that we're all here problem-solving with issues that are that we need to improve on. But I just wanted to tell you, as someone that lives in our community, and I'm an attorney, I work with a lot of undocumented citizens. We know a lot of undocumented citizens. And we want to say Washtenaw County is a county that, generally speaking, immigrants and undocumented citizens feel safer in than other places that I've lived in before, than other places they've lived in before. And it's because of people like you coming together, having these conversations, because of people like them coming together to hear what they have to say, that they feel this way, that I felt this way, my family feels this way. So I just wanted to highlight some positivity in the things that we're pointing out that we need to improve on, and say thank you to you all.
Okay, and that was our last intervention. In that way, I can't think of a better closing remarks. I know everything isn't all tied up neatly in a bow, but that is something good to hear. And I think there has been a lot of positivity today. There's a lot of goodwill on the part of everyone involved. And just look around you, how many people have come in 25 online on an April day that, on a weekend. There are a lot of people who care. Let's stay together. Many of you have signed in and have left your email for us so that we can be back in touch with you about other issues related and ongoing things. But who our next sheriff is really matters. It really matters, and you have, these choices before you. I'm going to just say a couple of things, and each of them also gets a chance to make their closing remarks, and then we will have some informal time. And mine are just, it's very hard to pull out, summarizing statements from today, and you all were here, you don't need to, but just want to point out policies and practices. Are you not hearing me well enough? Okay, I'm so sorry. Policies and practices should be very coherently aligned with each other, and they always aren't. And that's their job, but it's also our job to make sure that just because something's in a manual, that it's actually getting followed. And I think both of these people have given us the idea that they would appreciate our vigilance around that. And training is another major issue, and communication, both with the immigrant community and probably in concert, and also with the ally community, most of whom are us today. And that there's been a lot of call for change from both candidates and from you all, and from just the need that we feel. And then we end with the part that doesn't have to be changed, which is that on the whole, Washtenaw County has a lot going for it in terms of welcoming and caring about and walking with immigrant community. So that's my wrap up. I am going to give each of our candidates here a chance also.
I just have one announcement.
Okay, before we have our announcement, they will each just have, again, 3 minutes. So you'll know what our ending time is. Okay.
And we also, there's going to be an offering plate in the back. We wanted to take a love offering for asylum seekers that are coming in to Detroit, and the agencies that are working hard to help these vulnerable families and individuals. So I will be back there with a plate. If you have to write a check, please make it out to WCS and not Church of the Good Shepherd. So if you write it to WCS or Washtenaw Congregational Sanctuary, put it in the memo line, we will make sure that it gets to a good organization that's supporting asylum seekers in Detroit.
Yes, thank you all so much for your questions. I really enjoyed this discussion. I'm so glad that this discussion is happening. Just as a recap, one of my goals as sheriff will be to end cooperation with ICE in our jail and make sure our policy is not harmful, and that the deputies and employees that I'm supervising actually understand and follow our policy. I also want to continue these discussions, and if anyone wants to reach out to me to talk about your experiences or voice thoughts, you can do so. I have business cards in the back, as well as my website, which is dyer2024.com. We have a meet and greet coming up on May 30th, hosted by Laura and Ramiro, if anybody wants to join for that. And this is a tough job. We're talking about running for the chief law enforcement officer in this county. And I really believe that my experience actually serving as a deputy, as well as my policy and social work background, can really add a lot of value to this space. We have had the same administration for 16 years. I worked for Sheriff Clayton for a number of years. There are some things that I appreciate about him, but there's a lot of gaps. And I would not be running if I didn't believe that we can do better here and we have to have change. And so I really welcome you to get involved if you can, and hope that you all stay involved in the campaign, and I would be honored to serve you as your next sheriff. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here. Like I said before, this is a beautiful sight to just see people who are engaged in talking about real difficult issues. This has been what my job has been for the last 15 years, is bringing people around the table to talk about very, very difficult issues. And how do you bring police, activists, community, folks who've been harmed, all together around the table around these difficult issues. And I do think, to Janan's point, that we have a wonderful community. And we've done some amazing things at the Sheriff's Office. I rattled off some, I could rattle off a million others. I would not be sitting before you today if I thought we were perfect. I have a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old at home. I would much rather be playing on the floor with them on a Sunday before work tomorrow. But I'm here, putting my name forward, going around this entire county, because I know we still have work to do. As much as I am proud of what we've done, 22 years as a social worker in this community, 12 years as a certified law enforcement officer at the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office, 15 years of doing this work. When Sheriff Clayton said he was retiring, I looked around. I didn't take this role because of ego. I didn't think about the power trip. It was definitely not for the money. I've watched my siblings get raises and live less stressful lives. I do this work because it's personal. Tomorrow, I want to invite you to a campaign event. I'll invite you to an event where we're actually doing the work. The Community Violence Intervention Summit, I hope all of you can come all day tomorrow, learning about how we stop violence. And I use that as an example in my closing because that's what we've been doing for 15 years. We've been changing the soil in Washtenaw County. I say it often. If we only deal with the little symptoms and we use officers to deal with those symptoms, we will never, ever address the real root causes. There's a reason that people of color, again, find themselves even in more dire straits here in Washtenaw County. If you think it is only about the police, you are missing the point. We are not changing the soil in Washtenaw County. The housing market, the educational system, the healthcare system, these are the reasons that are perpetuating and ravaging the very neighborhoods like the one that I grew up in. So my entire reason for running for sheriff is not for small level policy changes. It is to bring us together and motivate us and hold us accountable to change the soil and move the needle to change communities. And so I thank you for the opportunity to have a face-to-face conversation. I encourage you to really get involved in the campaigns and to learn more, because in conversations like this, it's hard. 3 minutes to answer like generational, complex questions. So there's much more to the equation than that. I will just end by saying thank you so much. And on August 6th, I'm asking that you vote for Sheriff Jackson. Ann Arbor City has had 9 police chiefs in the time that Sheriff Clayton has been there. There is something to be said about continuity of culture change and building upon the foundation that has made us one of the best agencies in the state. Thank you.